Have a look at this dickhead.
What the fuck is he wearing?
He looks fucking stupid.
Well, I'm sure they did the best they could. The overall endeavor to build a new cinematic universe, the Twisted Childhood universe, is not really going too well, and it's not hard to see why. Winnie-the-Pooh Blood and Honey 2 is one of many sequels set for this franchise, already putting it ahead of the Tom Cruise Mummy remake fuck-up. But despite the common opinion being not that good but still an improvement, I don't even know if I'd go there. I mean, technically, yeah, it has better acting, better effects, more characters, a bigger body count, but still, it's not that good. One of the things I discussed in my other video about how this could have been great is the drastic change in appearance, and while I do have a theory as to why that might be, which we'll get to later, would it be crazy if I said I don't prefer this?
Are you out of your fucking mind?
Look, while this technically is an improvement, it's honestly less reminiscent of the material it's based on. The first movie was bad, don't get me wrong, but it was slightly overhated, and complaining about the look of the characters really didn't make sense to me. I guess if you're gonna base something off of Winnie-the-Pooh, I would like it to look something like that, even if it is less realistic. And with this, you'd barely even know what it was at first glance. Still, the sequel does have a lot of other things that seemingly make it better. It's no surprise it has the higher rating. A lot of people do seem to like it, and I guess it is the better movie technically, but the authenticity of watching Pooh commit heinous acts, something the original was not lacking in the first half at least, fails to have the same impact here, as at this point the authenticity has worn off. And that's not the movie's fault, but given that was the only thing the first movie had going for it, maybe this franchise isn't the best idea. If anything, this movie has the opposite problem, in which the first half is harder to get through, but the payoff is not all that worth it in the end, and for an independent movie, I still feel it could be a lot better. Again, if not being based on what it is, it wouldn't stand out at all. It's a disappointment for me, so let's see if we can see why. Like the original, we open with a narration, this time recapping the events of the previous movie.
The 100-Acre Massacre, as it came to be known, sent shockwaves through the quiet community of Ashdown.
It's your standard, nobody believes him, thinking he was responsible, leading him to return to his childhood home in Ashdown, and continue his medical training. But the few who actually did believe him set out to hunt the creatures, and I'm sure it'll go just swell.
Unknowingly, both Christopher and Pooh were facing the same ostracism. Unwanted. Hated.
Well, that's the way I look at it, but my clever bit, I guess. We cut to some teenagers who will soon get the body count going, but my big concern is the black girl is sitting on the floor. Well, who didn't see that coming? Really, the movie trailer gave it away. It's that blatantly obvious. Then again, the other two do suffer much worse fates, being burned alive and having all 4 limbs cracked. But still, it's not a very good opening, things happen way too quickly for any suspense. And as for the bear trap that popped her tire, she drives over it, but it doesn't go off. May sound like a nitpick, but that's not how that should look. However, if it's brutality you want, you do get that here. And aside from Pooh, this time played by Ryan Oliva, we're also introduced to Owl, played by Marcus Massey.
It's the abomination now.
And he's probably my favorite. He's got the most memorable lines. We then cut to Christopher Robin, now played by Scott Chambers, who is a better actor, which is not saying that much.
Why are you doing it? Why would you stop?
And he's going to hypnotherapy to deal with what happened. He also has a girlfriend, Lexi, played by Tallulah Evans, who will affect the plot somehow, eventually, I think. But at least she believes him, so that's one thing. But if you're looking for plot progression, there's not gonna be a lot of that for some time. For example, the next scene shows us some of the aforementioned hunters, as well as introducing Piglet, this time played by Eddy McKenzie. But aside from declaring they'll take the fight to them, which means whatever, and Piglet being immediately killed off, he could have just stayed dead, it's one of many, mostly irrelevant scenes. The deaths aren't particularly memorable, and yeah, one of them does live, somehow surviving a shotgun blast to the side of the face, but the only reason for that is so we can eventually see this. And this. Why he took the bandages off to do that, I don't know. And yes, that is the halfway point of the movie, but we already knew this. I get that he doesn't, but the trailers put a lot of emphasis on this deformed guy, only to show us stuff we already knew. He never appears again after this. I could give it a pass for being very early on in the movie, but this issue doesn't end here. After some very obvious foreshadowing, we see Robin has a sister Bunny, played by Thea Evans, who does something later, but I don't think it matters. She could have been cut completely and it would affect nothing. Same goes for this random kid's dad, an off-screen demise we don't need. But something finally does happen when we hear about Robin's brother Billy, who was kidnapped. And if you were only shown this now, maybe it would lead to an interesting twist later. But in the same flashback, we're also shown that Pooh was never really tame, and he only imagined that because
His naive young mind simply wiped away what he couldn't understand or explain.
yeah, that's what kids do. They're stupid. And by showing us both these flashbacks in one scene, it makes the revelation to come somewhat obvious. Bunch of kids being kidnapped, mutated people who were never really friendly, figure out the rest. There's no reason whatsoever to show us all this right now, and it completely ruined what would have been a decent scene later. Then there's this, and I mentioned this earlier. Apparently, the events of the first movie got made into a movie, which the kid Lexi has to babysit is watching, with footage clearly from the first movie. Obviously, that movie still happened, but I'm curious if this is their way of getting around the way that movie looked, implying that you never really actually saw those events. I can't guarantee it's what they're doing, but it's interesting to point out. The fact that they look so different is beyond noticeable, so it would make sense if that's what they did. Again, just a theory, but I could see it being the case. There is also the like button theory. You can press that if you enjoy the video, and if you want to see more content like this, the subscribe button is primarily for that. Also, the kid is kind of a weird inclusion too. Lexi seems to primarily dislike him, but we don't see him do anything that bad. So, I don't know, maybe she hates kids. But we have another pointless scene that advances nothing whatsoever. Aside from the introduction of Tigger, played by Louis Santer.
Fuck it, let's bounce.
That's my line.
And don't worry, Rabbit will make an appearance in some later sequel. It has been confirmed, but Eeyore really seems to have gotten the short end. I want to see that too. The lack of brutality is another issue. I'm not going to say it's completely lacking, but some of these scenes really do seem pointless. As for the plot, we have another hint that it might go somewhere. After his dad tells him now that he knows what happened, maybe he could reopen the investigation. But all this scene really does is give us more images, leading to a conclusion you can probably see coming by now. We do see an officer there the next day, but that's just to question Robin again, so that's pointless. We get a glimpse of the rave that will soon be massacred, but he's told not to come and Lexi can't go, so that's pointless too. Nobody we know is gonna be there. Way to make that scene riveting. His friend is killed. 2 to 3 scenes to his name, I think. But like I said, the deformed guy does tell him he was right, and that's not what leads to the big revelation. No, it's the janitor, who he recognizes at that very moment as the guy who kidnapped his brother.
Isn't that convenient?
Blatantly suspicious character, obvious plot twist, younger sister, kidnapped brother, evil cartoon-like characters that used to be children. It's Five Nights at Freddy's all over again. He goes to find him, and despite the obvious outcome, it's probably the best scene in the movie. I don't even know why, but there's something entertaining about this guy.
You took my brother and you took my friends, and fucking tell me what happened.
I can see you're very upset.
He's played by Simon Callow, one of the more notable names in this, and the way he somewhat casually explains what he did, being abducting kids to pay off gambling debts, is in a dark way comedic.
I just didn't really know what I was doing. So I got very, very, very drunk indeed, and I drove around a bit.
In a way, it's kind of like he's just reading the lines off, which does fit the movie nicely, but at the same time, it feels like he's trying to make light of what he did, even though you really can't. I don't know, the way he explains it just fits in perfectly. It's the best thing in the movie in my opinion, but the end we can't talk about because YouTube.
As if the Earth itself was
allowing this horror.
Of course, there is the plot to consider, but you should know that by now, in which Dr. Gallup experimented on kids using animal genes, buried them in the woods after things went bad, and they came back to life because reasons. This of course means Pooh is his brother, and Christopher was too dumb to notice the obvious outcome now for some time, and with that we can finally get to the only scene anybody gives a fuck about.
What the fuck, Lexi?
Oh, right, these two have to do something, I forgot. Pooh goes to their house, they escape, a random officer gets killed, Quan Chin style, highlighting the bad effects because why not? I don't know why nobody helped, they're real casual about it. The parents get killed off too, the mom's death we knew was gonna happen this way, the dad we don't even see. Apparently he kidnaps Bunny, I think. It will not make sense later. And now we can finally get to the party massacre. It's okay. It's got a number of good kills, but not as many as you'd really hope. It's the first time we get to see Tigger in action, so that's one thing. The bit with the eyes is definitely a standout moment, but overall, it's just okay. It's funny how one guy literally climbs into the furnace to hide. Another highlight right there. But, to me, it's a lot like that scene in The Mean One when he massacres a bunch of Santa Clauses. It's definitely fun to watch, but it doesn't make the whole movie worth it. Given this is the climax and not just a random scene, it doesn't justify sitting through all this. This is why I don't really consider this to be an improvement over the first movie. As with that one, the opening bits were the best part. We got to see Christopher being whipped with Eeyore's skeleton, lots of truly vile scenes, and while the second half was a bore to get through, there was an authenticity to the whole movie. At this point, that's already gotten old, so a basic horror movie massacre isn't enough to justify this even existing. It's enjoyable enough, but nothing we haven't seen. None of it matters anyway, as Christopher shows up way too late to do anything, but he does shoot Tigger, in which he leaves the movie, and Pooh pursues him with a flaming chainsaw, which I'm ashamed to admit got me excited for this movie. He does eventually tell him he knows who he is, which, you guessed it, affects nothing, but Lexi is there too, almost gets killed, so Robin can ask him to stop and completely blow what could have been an epic moment. You know, allowing him to speak this time, his "oh bother" catchphrase was so perfect for this moment, and somehow you fucked it up. That really speaks for itself, but it doesn't make any sense either. It really fits into my first movie not being the real thing theory, as in that we saw him looking practically invincible. It makes no sense whatsoever, and damn is it a lackluster climax. That's basically it. He gets his sister back. I don't know where she was being kept. His name is officially cleared due to CCTV footage. And the movie ends. I mean, there is a mid-credit scene showing us Owl, who was doing fuck all, located their bodies, and will bring them back to life, in other words, sequel bait. But that was the long-awaited sequel to Winnie-the-Pooh, Blood and Honey. And I would abandon the twisted childhood universe. I just don't see the point of proceeding with it. There could be improvements to come, but I don't know if that's what I'd call this. There's too many pointless scenes, characters exist for no reason, and it's just forgettable all around. As I've been saying, the authenticity is no longer saving any of it. I'm overseeing childhood characters committing heinous acts, and even the storyline that was somewhat promising is ruined because they made it too obvious. There's nothing really that stands out aside from one scene that's funny for whatever reason, and a couple of memorable deaths, but I didn't have that much fun watching it, and in the end, that's the main thing. In fact, it's the only thing. I know it sounds crazy saying I prefer the first movie, and I'm not completely sure I do, but it's basically the same, and I don't really care about either of them. It would solely be because that one came first, so it doesn't really matter. And if that's all the franchise has to offer, I don't see myself covering any more of these because it'd be pointless. Maybe an adaptation of something else could be interesting, and that is planned, but if it's the same setup, I may just leave it alone. Unless you're really into the concept, I don't recommend it. It just doesn't do anything for me, and unless they think of something new, oh bother will remain fitting catchphrase. I'm the analyst, and remember kids, kidnapping children for experiments is not okay, even if you plan on fessing up to it. So, you've made it to the end. That's an impressive feat indeed. Since you managed that, I guess check out the gaming channel, in which I cover a variety of gaming topics, like analysis videos, such as this one. If you're into that, then press the link in the description. It's that simple.